Good evening. It's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I really enjoy the opportunities that I have to come to see you. It doesn't seem like it's been forever, but it has been a while, and I probably won't see you for the next couple of weeks after tonight. But I look forward to when I come and see you, and I long to see you guys again here in a couple of weeks. And I hope that the things I say here tonight will be enjoyable to you, will encourage you and edify you, and make you walk a little bit stronger in your faith. I do, before I get started, like to ask you to remember me in your prayers, because Tuesday I'm going to go speak at Cornerstone Church of Christ, and they asked me to come and speak for them, and they said, Jay, he says, whatever you want, come over and speak, just let us know, and we'll be more than happy to have you. So as soon as I got off the phone with them, I looked at the Cincinnati Reds schedule, and they're playing the Yankees tomorrow. So I said I would do it Tuesday. So, but I look forward to them. They're a great group of brethren. Maybe a little bit intimidating, because there's a lot of great individuals at Cornerstone that I look up and admire. And I'm not saying I don't do it here, but it's just, there's seasoned preachers there. There's individuals that's coming to visit. Albert Dixon's one of them. I'm hoping I'm going to see him tomorrow. And it's neat to sit at the feet of them. It's nervous for them to sit at the feet of me. So I'd ask you that the things that I say to them will be encouraging and edifying. We're going to talk about worship and the value of worship, and I hope that it'll be beneficial to all. And if you guys want to see it, it'll be online on the Cornerstone Church of Christ on Tuesday evening. So tonight I want to talk about going to battle. Nathan talked this morning about how when it comes to us as being this living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, what is this sacrifice willing to do when it comes to putting up a fight for that spiritual warfare that we come across? And when we talk about the spiritual warfare, we think automatically of David and Goliath, because it feels like we're so small going against the Goliaths of this world today. And we say to ourselves, how do we go on to those challenges? Or we go to something like Ephesians chapter 11, or chapter 6, verse 11, when we talk about being able to put on the whole armor of God. That way we could go against the things of the devil. But tonight I want to talk about, though, is why do we go into battle? When it comes to the spiritual warfare we have to deal with, why do we go into battle? What do we bring to the battle when we have this fight? How do we approach the enemy? Are you ready for the battle? And if you are willing to go to this battle, will you win? And if you win, what do you profit? Now, I heard from one of the movies I used to watch on people's walk in the faith, and one of the statements that started right off the bat was, sometimes we think Christianity is winning the argument, and that is not Christianity. Even though we could win the argument, we could probably debate with the best of them, does it really bring someone closer to God when we have these kind of discussions? And what I want to talk about here tonight is when we go into these situations, how do we go into this battle? Are we prepared to go into this battle? And do we leave an opportunity for us to get hit back? And that's what I want to talk about here tonight. I want us to go first when our first point here tonight is, don't ever go into the battle unprepared. I never understood the logic for some individuals that will go into the kind of the lion's den and think that there's not going to be any repercussions when they proclaim their faith before individuals that do not see the same way that they do. And one of the prime examples is when I see individuals that will go and proclaim the gospel at maybe a pride event, or go into a situation where they know there's this sinful behavior going on, and they think that they're going to be able to conquer the world when they go into these challenges. And they get kind of discouraged and upset when the persecution is more than they can handle. And sometimes I wonder if they go into this battle a little bit more prepared, that maybe they could win a soul, not necessarily not necessarily going about the way that they go and try to promote this. If you think about Genesis chapter 13, for example, if you look at those verses there, 15 through 18, you see that God is going to give a land to Abraham. But he does not give this land blindly to him. It's not like he wraps this up in a gift and says, here you go, have at her. No, what you see here, he tells him, for all the land that you see, he says, I will give to you and your offspring forever. And I will make your offspring as dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. And he says, arise and walk the length of the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. What I'm trying to get at here is, when he is given this land, he goes and looks at the land. What is going to be the problems? What is going to be the pros and cons of obtaining this land? Is he going to have to deal with people outside the tribes? Is he going to have to deal with wild animals? Is he going to have to deal with things that, even though he has been given this great land, there will be problems with this? And you see that Abraham is going to go and try to test out these things to make sure he is capable of dealing with the things concerning the land. Another great example that you see is probably in Acts chapter 17. When you look at the Apostle Paul, when he goes to Mars Hill, and he talks about how these individuals are very religious. Well, how does he know that? It's because he checked out what this area is like. And then he goes to them and he tells them about how we are this offspring. He talks about this because you understand that passage there. And it's not a Bible passage. It's a philosophical passage that they understand. They say, yes, we understand that we're an offspring of something. And Paul says, I'm going to tell you who that offspring is. I'm going to tell you where does this all come from. He takes something that they're aware of and gets them to understand a little bit better. If you look also in Acts chapter 22, for example, when you look at Paul talking to the people in Jerusalem, and you see that this riot is going on, and you see that Paul, in order for them to get their attention, he starts to speak in Hebrew. And that's something that they are familiar with because that is their native language. So you see that when he goes into this battle, he goes in there and he understands that, well, if I'm going to get to these people, we got to have some kind of a starting point. Now, don't read anything into this, but we had a Friday Bible study down at Winding Road, and I tried to explain to them that we got to have a starting point somewhere when we talk about the gospel. And I gave the example, if Peyton ever came to me and said, Dad, I am going to be a father. Haley is pregnant. What do I need to do? Guess what I'm not going to tell him? I'm not going to tell him about the birds and the bees. Well, women are developing and men are developing. I'm not going to tell him that. He already knows that. But sometimes when we do the gospel and we promote this message, we kind of do just those things. We don't go to really a good starting point. Think about this, if you will, when it comes to trying to talk to somebody. Somebody wants to come to you and says, I'd like to know a little bit about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Sometimes, if we're not careful, what is the first things that come to our mind? We want to talk about instrumental music. We want to talk about how the Lord's Supper should be done on the first day of the week. We want to talk about what the money should go to when we take up a collection. We want to talk about everything, but really this message that Christ has given to us in the Gospels. And sometimes that's a very horrible starting point. We got to find somewhere that there's a common interest. We got to find somewhere where they can understand this and then take that next step. And unfortunately, we don't go into these situations prepared. If you look at 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 14, here's an example that should make us realize that maybe we need to work a little bit more on ourselves before we go to ask God to help us. And here's the example. If you look here in 1 Samuel chapter 28, starting in verse 14, you see that Saul is very disturbed because God is not talking to him anymore. And he is so upset and frustrated because the Philistines are always after him. And you would think, if God's not talking to me and there's problems coming ahead, I need to really think about what I need to do myself to kind of have God come back and talk to me. Do you think that's what he did? No, he didn't. What he did is he decided to break the law even more so and go to a medium. That's a violation of the law in Leviticus chapter 19. He goes to this medium, he goes, hey, will you get Samuel up out of the grave for me? Because I need to talk to him. He was a guy that always talked to me, and I need to listen to what he has to say. So she does this, and Samuel does rise out of the grave. You see there in verse 14, he asks, he goes, what is his appearance? He says, there's an old man coming up. He's wrapped in a robe. And Saul knew that that was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. And Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, he goes, I'm in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams, and therefore I have summoned you to tell me what I should do. And Samuel really tells him the same thing that he has told him when he was alive. Why did he really need to bring him up out of the grave if the problem is obvious here? And that's what really Samuel says to Saul. He says, your problem's obvious. But I'll tell you again, even though you brought me up out of the grave. He tells him there, he goes, the Lord has spoke to me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. Because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, and you did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. And therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you this day. The funny thing is, he told him that before. Now he has to tell him again. And now he's going to kind of add a little bit more to it, unfortunately. And he's going to tell him that not only do you lose your kingdom, you're going to lose your life. And your boys are going to lose their lives. Just because we see something fantastic happen here does not mean that this was God approved. And you see this kind of this chastising from Samuel. And sometimes when we go into this battle, we think to ourselves, we got to prove ourselves that we are individuals just like them. And therefore, we will go beyond the average individual, and we will push ourselves into some kind of worldliness approach. Maybe you remember that episode of The Office where Michael Scott wanted to impress some kids at a job fair, so he thought it would be cool to dress up like a kid. Well, he's about my age. He didn't look really impressive, he looked kind of creepy. But that's sometimes the idea that we think when it comes to promoting the gospel. We got to prove to them that we're just like any average Joe. We got to prove to them that we are more like the world than we really are like Christ, which is very scary if you think about it. Because it opens up the kind of Pandora's box that anything can go. And unfortunately, we become creepy. And we don't really show that we are like people of God. If people are searching for God, they should see that in you. And you don't have to put on any kind of dress to show that. It should be seen in here. This is why David was a man after God's own heart, because he had this inward appearance about him that people came to. And that's something that people are looking for in you and I as well. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go off subject here. Because a couple things, well, one thing happened tonight, but another thing happened to me in the past couple days. In Marietta, if you go to the Walmart in Marietta, there is a guy that stands there at the end of the road there in Walmart. And he's not a very nice man. At least that's what I've been told by a lot of people. Because there's times that people will bring food to him, and he gets mad that you brought him food instead of giving him money. And there's times that I have given him money, and there's those times that we gave him money, and all I really get is a thanks. And it's very really low and muffled, and you can't really hear it, but you know he's saying thanks somehow, some way. But here's the cool thing. A couple days ago, I saw him again. And I always yell, hey, Chief, hey, over here. And he came over to me. And here's the thing. He talked to me. I think the traffic's bad today. I said, yes, it is. Brethren, you don't know how long I've been looking forward to hearing that kind of a statement. Because all the statements I've heard is that low muffled thanks, or I hear these stories of him being ungrateful. But here's this real shining moment that we could do something. And Donna told me tonight, probably 2 months ago, I think I reached out to her. She thought I was a telemarketer trying to sell her insurance. And Donna has told me often, she's been praying and she's been trying to get her sister in here. She came today. I know it's a little bit off subject, but brethren, don't be weary in our well-doing. Larry prayed for that tonight. We'll get our moments. Just don't get tired of it. Don't think that your battle is not worth fighting for. It is. Sorry, I had to go off subject, but I had something on my mind, and that magnified it. So, but go back to our subject at hand. Another thing we need to do is don't leave an opening. And the one thing I find interesting, we had a study on this a couple of years, or probably about a year or so ago, but we talked about Ahab and Jehoshaphat, and how Ahab had this opportunity, or was told by a prophet, that if you go into this battle, which you were told not to go into this battle because it's going to take your life. And he told him, if you go into this battle, you're going to die. And and the prophet doubles down on this. He said, if you come back, then God hasn't spoken to me. And you see how Ahab kind of changes things in order for this prophecy not to come true. I'm going to dress like everybody else. And Jehoshaphat's going to be dressed like the king. So if somebody goes after the king, it's going to be him. So you see that he thinks that he can kind of maneuver this stuff around where he's not going to take this kind of impact. But here's the thing. Here's an individual that takes his bow, he takes a shot, and he has this perfect shot to where it not only hits him, but it goes right through his breastplate and kills him. He dies watching the battle. And I talked about how there's these like 1 in a million shots. And I brought this up because this is the closest I ever got to a hole-in-one. 6 inches away from the cup. I was with Carter and Peyton and one of his friends, Trevor. And I took a picture of it. But here's the thing though, brethren. It's not a hole-in-one. It's 6 inches away from the cup and it's a birdie. My point being is hindsight, I'm saying to myself, what could I have done to get that hole-in-one? And I'll be quite honest with you, I could have done nothing. I'm a horrible golfer. But when we have the opportunity to go out there and defend our faith, we have the opportunity to go out there and proclaim our faith, and when we go out there and we try to tell people about our faith, we say sometimes those exact same things. What could I have done to bring someone closer? What could I have done to have somebody obey the gospel, take the next steps in baptism? And we say that in hindsight. And sometimes when we do that kind of hindsight approach, we realize we have left ourselves an opening for persecution. We left ourselves an opening where we should have had an answer and we didn't. We left ourselves an opening where maybe there was just this one opportunity. And sometimes we get this one opportunity, this one shot with someone, and maybe we miss out on it because we left an opening. If you look there in Luke chapter 18, verse 20, we talk about the rich young ruler. And you see that the rich young ruler asks Jesus a question here. And he asks him, he goes, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And he addresses him as good master or good teacher. And he says, why do you call me good teacher? He says, there's only one good, and that's God above. It's funny because he never gave him an opportunity to respond. But he tells him, he goes, well, you know the commandments. Do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness, honor your father and honor your mother. And he says, I've kept all these from my youth. I'm going to be very bold here and think to say that a majority of you have probably done this too, right? I don't think there's any murderers here tonight. I don't think there's thieves here tonight either, or liars. I don't think there's individuals that are adulterers. I don't think there's individuals that are ungrateful towards their parents. The point is that these things that this individual has kept since their youth, as Jesus will remind us, even the Gentiles do this. It's easy to proclaim that we do these things because it's the easy stuff. The likelihood of anybody in this audience killing somebody, I just can't see happening. Adultery is the same way, stealing is the same way, lying's the same way. My point being, Jesus is trying to tell him, it's so easy to do the easy stuff, but what about the hard stuff? And he gives them an example of a hard thing for him to do. To a point to where one of his apostles said, then who can then be saved? It's showing kind of a doubt here that this individual who has these possessions has the opportunity to enter the kingdom of heaven. You know, it's like the story I tell you often about telling Tracy how great of a husband she has. And she reminds me that I could be better. Guys, that's just it. You are great individuals. You are great people. Now, I have no doubt in my mind. But if I tell you can be better, would you really take offense to that? Because we all can. We all can be better individuals. Don't say the prayer that we should be better individuals today than we have been in the past if you don't mean it. Because we need to be better individuals. And don't sit there and proclaim that you do all the good stuff or the easy stuff. Be the individual who's able to proclaim the hard things as well. You know, I'm reminded that the best individual that you can work on concerning your faith is you. And if he can't fix you, then why do you think you have any business trying to fix someone else? If you can't fix you. And Paul tells him about that. Why tell somebody they shouldn't steal if you were stealing? Why tell somebody that you shouldn't commit adultery if you're committing adultery? And it's about the other things too. Why do you tell somebody that they need to come here and worship if you're not here to worship also? Why would you tell somebody that they need to be able to sing and make melodies to the hearts of the Lord if you're not willing to do the same thing? You know, one of the things that we're going to talk about with the worship sermon is how we have this kind of worldly perception about how we look at music and how passionate we can become with worldly music. But when it comes to our songs and hymns and spiritual songs, how passionate are you? And how's your focus when it comes to that singing? You know, one of the things I thought about, and they probably won't know this, but what's my favorite song to sing here? As the Deer Pants. That's my favorite song. You know that's not my favorite song. But the funny thing is, when you hear me sing that song, I don't sing it any different. You know why? Because it's not about me. It's about God. If I sing it for myself, I'm not singing it. But it's about God. And we need to be mindful when it comes to singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. It's about God. It's not about me. Don't leave these opportunities. Another thing, too, is let's pick our battles wisely. If you go back to 1 Samuel chapter 17, you see that David has heard about Goliath. He comes down and he asks a question to the audience there about what shall be done to the man that kills this Philistine and take away the reproach from Israel. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And he gets his answer. He's going to be rich. Him and his family are never going to have to pay taxes. And he gets the princess. Sounds like Mario World. But it's worth it. That's what he wants to know. But here's the thing. His brother interrupts. And he says to him, he goes, why did you come down? And with who did you leave the few sheep that you had in the wilderness? He says, I know your pride and your naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that you might see a battle. Do you know how David kind of responds to this? He says a few little things. He goes, ugh, get away. I don't want to talk to you anymore, Eliab, because you're not the problem. Goliath is. That's the problem we need to deal about. Not you getting mad at me because I came down to find out what's going on and how do we take care of this situation. You think about how it seems like in the past 15 years, maybe even longer, we always talk about how homosexuality is a sin. I got a very vivid discussion with someone on social media about this. And everybody says this is a sin. Yep, it's always been a sin. And how everybody wants to take an adamant stance on this. Yeah, you should. But the thing I have a real problem with, why we have such an issue with this now, is because we've become so passive on sexual immorality. I mean, look at it now. When it comes to marriage and divorce and remarriage, when we understand in Matthew chapter 19, there's only one reason why you should be divorced, and that's adultery. And we see people go around that and say that, well, no, we're just not happy. We become like the people of Israel, and we say to ourselves, let's just get a certificate of divorce and find somebody we're content with. And we never talk about the principles and the values of marriage. And we don't talk about the other things of sexual immorality, such as cohabitation, where people are living with one another now. I had someone today ask me, he says, is there any way we could tell everybody we're married without going through the laws to be married? And I thought, that's dangerous. Because you know that from this establishment of the law, you're trying to circumvent it. But why are we not talking about the problems of sexual immorality? Why are we not talking about the promotion of healthy marriage? Why are we not talking about the things of marriage before someone decides to get a building and get a cake and get a beautiful dress and get a tuxedo and get married? Why are we not talking about these important things to avoid sexual immorality? Because, brethren, if you tell them about the sins of adultery, and you tell them about the sins of cohabitation, and you talk about the sins that is involved in sexual immorality, maybe homosexuality wouldn't be a problem to talk about. Guys, I'm getting ready to do a sermon on the Song of Solomon. Now, I'm going to bring it to you. It's not really, it can't be attended for here because there is young people and there's young people that are wanting to date. But brethren, we got to get out of this mindset that the Song of Solomon is some kind of X-rated Bible book. It's not. Because if we talk about the things that you see involved in the Song of Solomon, maybe Jesus doesn't have to remind them in Matthew chapter 19 about the hardness of their hearts because they're devoted on their passions for one another. And we'll talk about that. But if you think that the Song of Solomon is just this thing about how two people are lusting after one another, then you miss the point of the Song of Solomon. And I'd be surprised if somebody has ever heard a sermon on the Song of Solomon too. Because there's only two individuals I can recall have done it. I'm one of them, and Albert Dixon's the other. Maybe some people tell me. And if they have, God bless them, because it needs to be talked about more often. But that's it. We have bigger problems to deal with. If you deal with the Goliaths, then you don't have to worry about the Eliabs. And finally, Nathan, I think you talked about this some time ago. Sometimes we need to recharge and reactivate. There's a reason why you don't see Jesus going full bore through the whole time of his ministry. He's done a lot of great things, but sometimes we forget that sometimes Jesus went away in the wilderness. And he went away from the people. And it's because there was going to be some times he needed to be refreshed to take on the next battle. Unfortunately, many evangelists and many young individuals that start their walk in Christ go into it full bore, and they don't take the opportunity to stop. And then they get to the point they're so burnt out that they never ever come back to that passion that they started with at the beginning. And one of the great examples that we see is in 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah. Elijah has done a lot of great things here, and then all of a sudden Jezebel makes this statement. And we talked about this before. And she says, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I don't make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." He killed the 400 prophets of Baal. And he says, "You're next." Or she says, "You're next." So what does he do? He was afraid. And he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. He said, but he went himself a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, and saying, "It is enough, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Every time we look at Elijah, we look at him like some just very frail old prophet. But he is not an old frail prophet. He's more like a Jack Reacher. He is an individual who is willing to take on these challenges. And he has been successful, and he has been winning. He goes to a woman and says, "I got this little oil left, so I could make something to eat for myself, and me and my child's going to die." He was able to make that jar so full that they never had to worry about that anymore. He was able, when that child died, to resurrect him. And we know that resurrection doesn't happen very often in the Bible. He was able to do it. And then he went out and he slew with some other individuals 400 prophets of Baal. And they had this little contest to a point where he is mocking them. This is not a weak man. But this statement that has been given to him by this woman who is very powerful, he says to himself, he makes the conclusion, well, I guess there's not much more left for me to do. Are you serious? You are a powerful man. And God comes to him and he tells him, he goes, you need to rest. The angel of the Lord comes to him and gives him something to eat and something to drink. And he is refreshed. And you see there in verse 8, he says, he rose and ate and drank, and he went into the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. Yeah, he's been fed, he had his thirst quenched. And now God tells him, what are you doing? You've been going full bore. You needed a chance to sit down and stop. I gave you that opportunity to stop. You're able to be refreshed. Now let's get going again. Once again, let's not get into a situation where we become weary in our well-doing. Brethren, we are told throughout Scripture that we are warriors. And we have a battle to fight. And if you don't think we have a battle to fight, look at your attendance here tonight. We do have a battle to fight. The one thing I find interesting about David, and maybe this is a stretch, but take it for what it's worth. When he goes to face Goliath, he takes 5 stones. You ever ask yourself, if he had God on his side, why didn't he just take 1? I heard this from a preacher. But he asked, he says, why is it that David, if he's got God on his side, and he's that confident, he's that cocky, that he is going to take on this individual, and he's going to win, then why does he need 5 stones? He could just use 1 and call it a day. You ever notice in 2 Samuel chapter 21 that Goliath is not the only giant in Gath? If you start there in verse 20, it says, there he was at war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature. He had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, and 24 in number. He was also descended from the giants. And when he had taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. These 4 descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Once again, I know I'm stretching it here, but isn't it a possibility that he went on to battle? He wasn't just focused on Goliath. And if God was on his side, maybe he just wipes them all out. My point, brethren, for tonight is that when we go and we have discussions, when we go and we have talks, when we see the opportunity come along, we're ready. Look at 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. It tells us, be ready to always have an answer to the hope that's within you with meekness and fear. Be ready. Because time is not on our side. Whether you're 7 or you're 77, we have a war to wage. And we can win. But if we go into this mentality that we are going to lose, or we just give up when the first rejection hits, yeah, we will lose. But if we look at God for all the things that he has done for us, we are willing to go full bore against this world. Maybe the starting point for you here tonight is through baptism. And this is available for anyone who wants to take that next step in their faith here tonight. Maybe it's through repentance. I still remember coming forward on Sunday morning after I had a discussion the night before with a brother in Christ while we was at work. He told me, he says, I think you need to go forward. Now, I just said humbly, you're right. And Brother Tim sat there with me. He said, I think you just need to tell him what you told me. I said, I don't want to be a hypocrite anymore. I want to do the right thing. That was my starting point. And that's available for anybody here tonight. Maybe you need to pray about something, because we realize prayer works. We have an opportunity to pray about things concerning our faith here tonight. Maybe you need to be built up. Maybe you need to be edified and encouraged. Prayer is one of those avenues. I've used always the example about if I needed something, you had no problem in the world to help me out if I need it. And that's been very evident in a physical perspective. But brethren, how much more does that mean when an individual is willing to pray for you for the thorn to be removed? For you to be the better individual today than you have been in the past. These things are available right here, right now. Someone needs to respond. Let's do so while we stand and while we sing.